the last time my guest today was on the show, we had a very mathy, weighty, heady conversation all about recession proofing your business. We got into inflation. We got into interest rates. We talked about the Fed, all kinds of boring stuff that generally most of us probably wouldn't otherwise really care about, but important economic and financial stuff. And now here we are together again on day one of a trade war. Welcome back, J. Michael.
Well, it's as the aggressor nation, it's nice to be here, and we'll shortly be crossing your borders and taking your maple syrup and your hockey pucks. But
we are currently
our sincere apologies.
we are currently lining our borders with snowmen and Canadian geese because that's about all we got to fight with. So.
Well, you don't have any good goalies anymore, so I'm going to say just put like Connor McDavid up there. Maybe he can just sort of stop shy. I don't know. Just lay in front of the puck.
Wouldn't it be nice to come on the show and just have a normal conversation about normal things? We should do that one day.
It would, but you know what? There was a moment in time that the alternate reality opened, the hole, the warp, the whatever it was, the portal, and we went down that timeline, and here we are. So
here we are. It was not necessarily planned for you to come on and talk about this stuff, but it just worked out that it happened to be day one of the trade war today that we're doing this. And so here we are. And it's probably something that we need to talk about. Although I have to tell you that there's a part of me that feels like I am risking career suicide simply by bringing up the subject of politics at this point. And so I would very much like to not, commit career suicide here, but
let's live on the edge.
Yeah, I think there's some important stuff that we need to talk about. So we did that episode where we talked about inflation and interest rates and the Fed and recession proofing your business and all of that sort of stuff. And even though we didn't specifically end up in a recession officially, I don't know about you, but almost every single voice actor that I talked to last year told me that they were having a down year in 2024. So it seems like we weren't too far off with the subject matter there and some of the advice that we were giving to try to recession proof a little bit. Is that what you saw?
Well, I don't know that everybody was having I mean, I grew at my normal rate last year. It was actually the year before that had me more concerned, where I was sort of half my normal rate about halfway through the year, and then it kind of turned back on around October or so. Last year, I kind of grew at my normal rate, so it wasn't going down. But the thing is, and I think the reason that everybody's feeling the pinch is that we've been in this inflation spiral forever. We are living. I'm making more money today than I ever have in my life. And we're living less well than we did 7 or 8 years ago. Okay. Yep. Because all the things that Anna and I like to do have not just gone up 20% or 30%. They've doubled or tripled in what they cost. And, so that, I think that maybe has had more impact than actual decline in income. I know there have been some talent. I think a lot of talent who are kind of caught in the middle, and that I think also is coming to an end a little bit. But I think that glut of pandemic entries in 2020, 2021 created this, never seen it before, but a glut in the middle of the market in voiceover, where usually you have the glut at the low end and then a little bit of a glut at the high end. This time there's a glut in the middle of the market. And I think that's finally starting to shake out. But I think that's what accounted for and maybe some people not doing as well as they expected. But we didn't have the recession, but with inflation,
kind of
six of one, half dozen of the other, right? So.
Yep. I said to Mary Ellen the other day, I was like, man, I freaking hate going to the grocery store right now. Like, it's just depressing going.
It's great. It's good. And what's funny is because you guys know I split time between Europe and the States, and in Europe, we don't feel it as much. Now, Luxembourg is a really pricey little country, but we go for basics. Germany is 5 minutes away. And you go to the German grocery stores, the same bar of deodorant that I buy in the United States at a Safeway in Maryland, which is like $6.49. Okay. In Germany is €1.29. I do not understand how that works, but you can apply that to all kinds of household products, produce. Eggs have not gotten super expensive here. They're a little more than they were, 6 months ago, but they haven't gone nuts. So, my question, the why of that to me is very interesting.
We're all moving to Luxembourg. That's what's going to happen now.
Go to Germany or France. Luxembourg's a fortune. Go to the other two.
So, At the end of 2024, you said you were feeling pretty optimistic about 2025 for VO. A lot can change in just a few short weeks, or, in the weeks since we originally scheduled this interview. Are you still feeling optimistic on the economic front, or do you think this is going to have an impact?
I don't think it's going to have a short-term impact on voiceover. I think it will have obviously a short-term impact on a lot of cost of living things. There are a lot of permutations and possibilities that we can't anticipate, right? I mean, we can guess, but we don't know what it's going to look like, how long it's going to look, how painful it's going to be, how quickly that pain is going to make people change their minds and maybe back down, or if it gets worse, who knows? So this is such an unusual thing that it's incredibly hard to predict what the outcome will be for the economy at large. But for the voiceover industry in the short term, I don't think we're in an industry that, other than seeing these handful of Canadian buyers go, yeah, we don't want any Americans right now. But other than that, I mean, I don't think it's going to have a lot of impact on us. And I do remain optimistic because I will tell you that, it started kind of last fall that it seemed like everything was starting to kind of get back to normal in VO, that the AI panic was dropping a little bit, that the job flow started to look more like it did, pre-pandemic, if you will, because the pandemic 2021, 22, there was weird inflation in certain areas where there were tons more jobs, and then there were some areas there weren't as many, and it was skewed. The pandemic skewed the whole market for a good 4 years, and it felt like at the end of last year it was starting to look more like 2018, 2019 again, like normal. And that's my sense now. It's been, we were talking before the show, it's been my best start to the year since 2022, and a lot of VOs I'm talking to feel like it's a pretty good moment. January and February have been pretty strong so far. The numbers I'm seeing come out of talent agencies, the numbers I'm seeing, even still looking at Voice 123 as a platinum member on there. I don't screw around with it much anymore, but I still, see all the auditions, invites come in. Looks pretty steady. Production companies, ad agencies, SEO, all my other normal sources, and marketing conversions tend to all kind of look like they should. So I'm not seeing anything in the numbers that suggests anything actually, frankly, other than probably a little bit of a better year this year than the last couple. But who the hell knows? I mean, we could be launching nukes at each other by Friday. So,
oh, man. I was thinking, like, I noticed in January, I think I saw, it honestly felt like January, I saw more auditions from my agents in January than I felt like I saw in all of 2024. Like, it just came out of the gate strong. Definitely slowed down a bit for February. I'm curious to see what happens next. And to be clear, voiceover as a service is not something that is going to be impacted by tariffs. Where I guess we'll feel it in the industry, or if we feel it in the industry, will be depending on what different sectors that we're in for voiceover that are impacted by tariffs, and whether or not that causes them to make different spending / buying decisions. Right.
Get ready to see a lot more dollar store commercials.
Yeah. It's not like we have to start charging tariffs as voice actors, or we're going to be impacted directly.
I told Mark if he didn't pay me 40%, I was not coming on this podcast today. And he said, you know what, 40% is 0. So, okay.
So we're good. We're good. Canadian dollar's not worth the money the paper that it's printed on at this point. So what difference does it make? But I think where we potentially see some impact is, take automotive, for example. There's so many different tariff threats that are happening specifically to the automotive industry. And so if some of these manufacturers go through any kind of shutdown or slowdown or anything like that, that could have a trickle-down effect to dealers, which trickles down to sales.
And we saw that during the pandemic too, where you had the supply chain, problems, and you had the prices going up, and there wasn't the availability. And if you have that same kind of a thing, I mean, that certainly could have a sector by sector impact.
Right. So we kind of joked about it a little bit, but I think it's a topic that is worth at least exploring a little bit, and we'll try to do it as diplomatically as possible. But do you think that certain policies could have an impact on voice actors who are working across borders? So whether that is U.S. companies who fully embrace the whole Buy America thing and only want to work with U.S. talent, or is it outside countries who are impacted by some of these tariffs, some of these policy decisions, some of the things that are going on, and they're going to take the opposite approach and say, no, we're not going to work with American talent at this point. Do you think we could run into some of that?
Well, I hate to say it because I already have seen the we don't want to work with American talent starting to happen. Not so much from Europe. It has mostly been Canada so far,
right.
but I have seen now a few times that we're prioritizing Canadian talent or we're just not casting Americans for this job. I think where it works the other way is I think you're going to see, and this is partially this issue, but also partially the focus on immigration now in the U.S. is that you may start getting more difficulty from agents and buyers in the U.S. about making sure that your paperwork is in order, that you have whatever the foreign form is that's necessary to show that you're legal to work in the U.S. There have been so many. There's so many ways to work with talent who aren't U.S. citizens that a lot of buyers aren't aware of, like just filing I think it was a W-8BN or whatever it's called.
Yep.
There are a lot of legal ways to do that, but there are a lot of, especially some of these payment aggregators, if agents or certain other entities use them, they're just like, if you can't give us, what is it, an I-9 or whatever that form is that says that you're legal to work in the U.S., if you can't supply that, then we just don't even want to talk to you. There may be more of that just out of it's funny though, because it's what's the old saying, don't obey in advance, right? And I think there is some of that's happening in the U.S. where people are doing things in anticipation of enforcement that isn't actually happening right now. So I hope that doesn't get too out of control and that it ultimately doesn't affect our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world.
I was listening to CNBC earlier because I'm that guy. And it was funny listening to some of the guests that they had on today. And at the time that we're recording this is technically day one of tariffs for Canada and Mexico. And they're just constantly, everybody that was on was saying the same thing. They're like, we didn't think that it was going to get to this. Like, we literally thought it was going to be a negotiation tactic, and we're going to negotiate whatever they wanted, whatever the deal was.
It doesn't make any damn sense. So.
But here we are. And so it's like even they're like, I'm not really sure, I don't know that everybody knows what they're going to do at this point. Cause I think the plan all along was assuming that this wasn't going to happen, and nobody knows how long it's going to last either. And I know that it's a sensitive subject. Like, I can tell you, I had people cancel coaching with me because I'm Canadian, and so I'm the enemy now, right? Like, and I was like,
that's terrible.
Yeah, like I just, and so you don't know how it's all going to play out, but it is a subject that I think that we need to at least be thinking about a little bit, just because at the end of the day, we're not just voice actors, but we are business owners, and we potentially are impacted by this stuff, maybe not directly, but in indirect ways. And so it helps to kind of pay attention to what's going on and see where things are ultimately going to land, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that you really want to hear my whole theory behind
we really are going to get canceled
where it's going, but it doesn't make sense unless you think very darkly. And I just hope everybody comes to their senses. We have good negotiated solutions, and that the economic impact is short and minimal.
I feel like there's a game of 4D chess going on right now, but most of us only get to see like 3 dimensions of it. And that's why it's just, we're like, what the heck is the end game in all of this? But all right, let's move to something a little lighter.
We're not going to go into spheres of influence theory.
I think, although maybe this isn't lighter either, because I think it depends on how you look at it. But I think there was this thing that happened late in 2024, this pretty significant thing that happened late in 2024. And it seems like since that moment when that thing happened, there's been a little bit of a shift in some of the direction that we're seeing now. Are those two things directly correlated? I don't know. Does it specifically matter? Not necessarily, but reads are shifting for 2025. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, what's funny is I thought at the time, I thought perhaps it was directly correlated, and I think some of the ad agency people were thinking that way too. And now actually I've come to sort of a slightly evolved conclusion on the why. And so what we're seeing is first and foremost, before we even talk about demographics, it's a shift towards assertiveness. It's a shift to I've seen that word literally in 3 castings today, including one where I was requested personally for the job. Assertive. It's a shift towards assertiveness. It's a shift towards ownership in your reads. It is a shift away from vulnerability, a shift from away from anything chatty or cute or broken, or unless it's really heavily written humor, where a lot of that still kind of they're still trying to figure out where they're going to go with that. That's still very much in the same pocket. But we're even seeing some more alpha voices cast on that kind of work, which is a little surprising. So it's definitely a shift that's a little bit more aggressive, a little more assertive, alpha, ownership based, whatever you want to call it. My theory behind the why, first and foremost, is it's not so much political as it is socio-psychological. And what I mean by that is that, look what we led with today. The world, but particularly the United States of America, has now gotten to a place in its socio-psychology where everybody is convinced they're right.
Yep.
There's no longer room for nuance. I don't think that 1% that was malleable before, or 2% or 3% of swing voters, or whatever you want to call them, I think they've made up their minds. I don't think there's any room anymore. I think everybody just believes they're right. And what's funny is that at the end of the day, for better or for worse, the buyers, ad agencies, corporations, whoever is hiring us, they're going to go with what they think is going to sell.
Yep.
And if we're living in a world where everybody has made up their mind, they think their point of view is right, and they're not willing to brook any argument about it anymore, that's going to be reflected in the reads that we hear. Also, in times of great uncertainty and tribulation and turbulence in the world, we see a movement back towards assertiveness. There are a lot of people, for people who haven't been in the industry for decades, okay, people don't realize that the first seeds of conversational started to happen actually before the year 2000. We started to have reads in the late 90s, mostly men, mostly kind of early to mid 30s. But during the dot-com boom, we were starting to get some reads that I would describe as pre-conversational. They weren't quite fully formed in terms of being heavily acted yet, but they weren't the announcer. They were a little younger. They were a little more straightforward. They were a little more plain-spoken. They were a little more real and authentic. They weren't quite what conversational evolved into over time, and they certainly weren't really heavily acting based, but they were definitely different than what we had heard for a long time. 9/11 put an end to that. 9/11 stopped that trend in its tracks. And from 2001, from 9/11 through about 2006 or 2007, the announcer, the alpha read, the dominant read, the more ownership-based read, that came back. That was still very much the thing that you heard, right? And then it was 06, 07, 08 when we started to swing into conversational starting to become the new hot thing, and that trend has lasted for a long period of time now. So there are a couple of factors in play. One is that we are in these weird times. One is that, we are, in this, hey, look at the Harrison Ford spot, no VO, but from the Super Bowl where, for Jeep, where it's like, hey, you know what? I got my electric. This is what I want. I like it, but you know what? We make diesels. If you want to get your diesel and do your thing, you do you, right? We're not going to argue about it. We're not going to fuss about it. We're going to make both of them. Here's one for me. Here's one for you. You do you, right? And it's just gotten into that place where it's like
so civilized,
right? But also it's we're not arguing anymore.
Yeah.
It's this is what it is, right?
Yep.
The other thing is that going back to the fact that the classic conversational read became so aggressively dominant in the industry starting late 2000s, but then getting into 2011, 12, 13, 14 is when it really accelerated. And for the better part of a decade, that's been the thing that everybody's wanted, right? Well, guess what? The average consumer isn't stupid. And for the same reason that the announcer read started to go out of style, the announcer read started to go out of style because that's all that people heard for decades, right? Well, all that people have heard for the last 10 or 15 years, except on local commercials, has been chatty, authentic, relatable relatable, real believable, conversational guy next door, girl next door, right? And for the most part, younger. And so eventually the ear starts to process that and go, wait a minute, maybe this isn't real. Maybe this is just another trick that they're using to try to sell us, and it becomes less effective. And there's been a crisis in the commercial advertising world for the last couple of years because return on investment in general has been going down. Buyers have not been able to figure out why. Their theory had been that it was because they couldn't figure out where younger eyeballs were going, so they weren't being able to effectively target their ads enough. What they have actually started to evolve to now is the theory that they just didn't understand the fact that the way that they were marketing was becoming less effective. And, a lot of people have asked me, do you think this means, because we're seeing specs go older, we're seeing specs go 35, 65 a lot more than we are 18 to 25 or 18 to 30 now. For the very first time in eons, if I shop a talent of, friend of mine or somebody I've done their demos for to agents and I'm getting pushback on 25 to 35 females, well, we have enough of them. Right. Whereas a year ago, I could have taken a really great one in that category. And who do you want to sign with? Right. And now it's more pushback where all of a sudden 50-year-old guys with big booming voices suddenly are getting signed again. Right. And it's like, OK, this is definitely different. But I don't think I think the age thing will be a thing. I think we probably are going to be in a year where a little bit like 2020, a little bit like during COVID. I don't think it'll be as dramatic because COVID, it really was quite dramatic. But I think that we're going to be in a year where if you have a really bright, youthful voice and you sound, sub 30, sub 25, and that's the only thing you can do, it may be a little leaner this year in commercial, in promo, in narration, and, some of the more common genres than it has been in the past. That'll cycle back at some point. Everything is cyclical. A lot of people are asking me about, do I think things are going to get less diverse because we have this administration that's focusing so aggressively on attacking DEI and attacking anything about diversity and inclusion? I don't necessarily think so, and for a couple of reasons. America's demographics are still shifting more heavily diverse. Buyers know that. So buyers aren't going to kowtow to a presidential administration if it's going to negatively affect their bottom line. Okay. Sure. So by buyers, I mean the people who are selling us stuff, right? So ad agencies, corporations, they're going to do what makes sense to them. Now, they're probably going to try to walk a fine line, okay, but they're not going to stop appealing to growing demographics in the United States because that doesn't make economic sense. And that's putting aside the morality of the whole thing, right? But it doesn't make economic sense. What I am hearing from ad agency people, which I find really interesting, is that one of the things that they took away from the election was that they did not understand that certain demographics were interested in things that it just hadn't occurred to them before. We're seeing iconic brands in the U.S. that were typically Gen Z focused, typically more diverse, right? And especially in terms of the voices that they hired, going back to 35 to 65 white people for their voices. But at the same time, all of a sudden, I'm seeing more truck spots for black guys. I'm seeing more, Latino women doing sports stuff, and more minorities doing stuff for boats, or for stuff that's, heck, even a little more Southern, and then the Southern accent coming in as well. So I think there's going to be just a shift in what people are getting hired for which jobs, but not necessarily certain groups being hired less frequently. I do think probably a pendulum swing back to where the pie is a little bit more broadly distributed. But look, the industry's made incredible strides in terms of diversity over the past 10 years in particular. It's something that I'm personally very proud of, and I think the industry should be very proud of. We're not going to go away from that. Buyers aren't going to go away from that because it's not going to serve their interest at the end of the day, but they are going to have some strategy with regard to, what demographics they're shopping, to what markets and to what products. And it could be a bit of an interesting year to see where that goes.
I sat in a commercial session that you taught at VO Atlanta last year, and I was sitting with Nadia Marshall, and forgive me if I don't get it quite right, but basically what I took away from it at that point in time, you were talking about how commercials had gone into a little bit more youthful place, and male voices in particular were a higher register place because lower register males were basically associated with toxic masculinity.
Right.
And I remember sitting with Nadia and being like, well, that's it. I don't need to sit through the rest of this session because that explains why I'm not booking commercial anymore. But then to go back to something you said a few minutes ago, I've noticed more auditions in the last month or so that are specifically saying deep and gravitas.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, maybe I'm going to have a shot to make a little bit of money this year finally, to be able to cash in on that. So that's
and the bottom line is that it is a pendulum shift, and because what I said a year ago was absolutely accurate.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know, but the sea change has been that buyers have realized that they essentially stopped targeting young to middle-aged men with, you know, I mean, by which I mean late 30s to, you know, to 60s men, with almost any of their advertising, unless it was, you know, a truck, a boat, you know, or Bass Pro Shops, right? Or country music. They basically stopped targeting grown men with most of their advertising. And they're realizing now that maybe that wasn't the smartest move, because there are still, you know, half the country's male, you know, and there's still a lot of money in those pockets, right? And part of that also accounts for the swing back towards the middle-aged demographic, because they realize that at the end of the day, you know, and this is not a great commentary on society, but at the end of the day, Gen Y, Gen Z, they've been screwed over. Even millennials have been screwed over. It's the 40-plus people, the 45-plus people who have most of the money, right? And so buyers know that. They're not stupid. They've wanted to get on the train of we're going to try and get in with the young buyers now and cultivate our brands with them. That's been their thinking for years, but it hasn't actually worked really well. And the metrics have shown that it hasn't actually worked really well. So if we want to get really crass about it, if there's a shift, the shift is primarily because they're going, let's just go back to the people who spend the most money.
I mean, at the end of the day, you can't, you know, it doesn't matter how you feel about it. That's just business, right? That's
just business.
We're here to maximize profits for shareholders is what it comes down to. But no, to your point, like last year when you said that at VO Atlanta, I was like, yeah, this makes sense. This is why, like, I wasn't even seeing anything. Even some of my agents weren't even sending me anything. And now in the last
it's weird how quickly things shift too, because I'm even noticing this like with Tom's generation, right? And he's maybe just a little too young to be aware of this, but the under 16s today are not like the under 16s 10 years ago. I think this generation that's coming up right now is going to be the next Gen X. That they're going to be the next don't give up generation, right?
Can you blame them for what they're growing up in, for the environment that they're growing up in, right?
And so I mean, we grew up during good times in a lot of it, but the specter of nuclear war hovered over our heads. You know, I remember I used to deliver the Washington Post when I was a kid, and I'll never forget, you know, the morning at 4:30 in the morning, we get all the papers and put them in the car, and the headline is Soviet Union collapses, right? And I was aware of all that at the time, and it's something you thought about, what it would feel like to be incinerated, right? And so this generation's now starting to think about that kind of stuff, and this is going to be a martini swilling, you know, leather chair and marble loving, show me the money generation, as opposed to the last couple, which have been much more like the 60s and the 70s and much more of a counterculture. I think this is going to be a 1980s style generation, and I think corporations are starting to figure that out, and they're targeting it. They're not stupid. You know, one of the things here, you want to hear something crazy? I was talking to Lynn Norris about this, and I think she thinks I'm nuts, but I said that, you know, what actually is a little frightening is you look at how quickly all of the social media platforms after the election that were basically doing the bidding of the previous administration just all of a sudden we're at Trump's table, you know, bow down and kiss the ring. And my thought process was, well, Google, Meta, Facebook, X, whatever, there's nobody in the world that has better and deeper data on what young people are looking at, thinking, and consuming, and saying, and thinking, right? What if they're seeing trends that tell them where 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds of today are going to be in 5, 10, 15 years, and they're pivoting based on that's a scary thought. But what if they're pivoting based on that, right? You know, because again, these are the super predators in our pool of humanity, and they're going to go where the money is. What if their data is telling them hey, and the buyers are doing this. It's a weird. I love the backstory on all this stuff. It's just fascinating to look at the psychology behind all.
I've actually studied some of this.
Horrifying.
I think The Fourth Turning is one of the books that I read that talks about a little bit about this and understanding generational shifts and changes that happen over time based on, what generation was in charge, what generation was doing the raising, how that generation raised up or whatever. And so I don't think you're wrong about the shift that this next young generation is going to be like the next Gen X. I can totally see that. And I think, well, I mean, like you said, the social media, who has the data? They've got the data, right? They know exactly what they're saying, what they're thinking, how they're acting, what they're looking at, and whatever. And so it's totally true. So now that we've gone through some of these shifts, does it mean that conversational is dead, or does it mean that conversational is about to be redefined for the umpteenth time?
I think it's going to be redefined. I think you're going to see, especially with humor, it's going to take a lot longer for there to be pronounced shifts. One of the things I referred to in my blog was the IndyCar promos series that's out there right now that Fox has been doing for their IndyCar stuff, which I read for actually. And honestly, basically did the same read as the guy who booked it. I just went back and listened. I'm like, oh, I just was 10 years too old for that. And he was 35-ish, and my voice print on it went about 45-ish. And if I'd have known, I'd have probably gone a little younger on it. But they wanted kind of alpha tech bro in your face without being too much of a jerk. And it worked really, really well. I think the humor is going to take longer to go away from what we recognize as conversational. So all the little tempo play, all the little broken things, all the little imperfections and things like that, I think we still get to do that with humor, unless it's particularly alpha humor or something like IndyCar, which might be a little bit more assertive, but they're still sticking with play. I think everything else that we've seen as conversational and labeled as conversational over the past decade or two is going to change, and I think it's going to be just a little bit more declarative, a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more to the point, perhaps a little bit more polished than it has been in a while. I don't think we're not going back to 90s puke, okay? But we could very well be going back to 2006, 2007, at Chase, we have the best products for you. We do this, and we do this. Come on in and find out why at chase.com today, right? A little bit more of a polished thing, as opposed to something that's meant to be cuter or more relatable or more real, just a little bit more, here's what it is. And I don't think it's devoid of emotion. I think it's going to have a little sell on it. I think it's going to feel a little more old school, but not, again, not 30 years ago,
Sure.
More like 15 or 20. Although I had a spot recently for a pretty big corporation that was leaning premium, leaning luxury. And for the first time in a long time, my manager came back and said, "Can you make it a little bit more snooty?" I'm like, well, yes, I can.
As a matter of fact,
I haven't been asked to sound like a Fidelity commercial from the 90s in a long time, but I can do that. So it's a pivot. And it's in this industry, if there's nothing, we've learned more than anything else over the years, and COVID in particular, because there were some real interesting shifts that happened in certain reads and certain genres during COVID, is that you got to stay on your toes and you got to be abreast of what's happening. And if you do that, you're going to book. And this is probably why I've had a good couple of months and start to the year, is that, I consume this stuff. I just eat. This is what I do all day. Right. And if you stay ahead of the curve, you're going to stay ahead of the curve.
I know you have talked about AI being a nothing burger. We've kicked the robots off the stage at
White Castle burger.
I know last year when everybody kept talking about, having a down year or slower, things had slowed down or whatever, I was trying really hard to figure out what was going on. And in the end, I decided that it was probably much more economic related than it was specifically AI related. And some of the conversations that I've had with clients and some prospects that I've talked to as well, what I'm actually seeing more of is there was a percentage who were early adopters, just like there is with any new technology, any shiny new object, right? Let's try it out, play with it, see. And they tried it out, played with it, and saw that they didn't like it. And so they've come back. And there's a percentage of people that I've talked to who, anybody in the creative space is worried that this could take their job too. It's not just voice actors, right? And so there is there's almost this, like we got to stick together as humans and keep working with humans. And so I have not seen AI have at this point anyway, I have not seen it have a huge impact. What do you see?
I agree. It nibbles around the edges at certain very lower end parts of the. I mean, I hear my kid, on his phone listening to some video with horrible AI voice, and I'm like, dude. I'm trying to teach him, like, that's bad AI voice, right? He's like, yeah, I know. I've done voice. It's like, I've done voiceover, Daddy. I'm like, yes, I know. But
he's an expert now. I'm gonna have him on the show next. Get his opinions on 2025 trends.
When he told Randall Ryan, "Hey, I won my first award," I'm like, dude, shut up. But that's what it's doing. I mean, those were $30 Fiverr jobs to begin with. Okay. Yep. The YouTube videos, the low end, narration that they just slapped together on something that's made in Thailand and, is processed for the masses. No shot at Thailand. I love Thai food. Thai people, great people. That sounded like Trump. I'm using my hands and everything. It's a wonderful country. Been there many times. I need to learn how to do more impressions. I've been able to do a president since Clinton. I'm falling behind here, but I'm going to say this one more time. And no, I'm not. But anyway, no, I think it's, it's not a nothing burger, but the phrase that I've used for a while now is it's a parallel industry. And what I mean by that is, look, hey, when I kicked that robot off the stage at VO Atlanta in 2023, I was putting on a good face, okay? Because I had more worries about it then than I do right now. Yep. I'm shocked it hasn't done more damage in the last 2 years. And the fact that it hasn't tells me that it's not going to. When I say it's a parallel industry, I think that, like you said, there are people who gravitate towards that. This is easy. It's not even always so much about money, because you can get cheap voiceover if you want it. Okay. This is easy, plug and play, and we don't really care at the end of the day what it sounds like. And it's just the way their brains are wired, and they don't want to deal with people. And there are just people who are like that, right? And that's their buyer base. And then there are people who are, like you said, who are creatives who are going to go, we're never using it if we can avoid it, because we want to work with humans philosophically. And then there are the people in the middle who are probably going to, I can't tell you, I think the one thing it has replaced a lot of is scratch tracks. And, I get a lot of scratches now that are definitely AI, and that even the client will say, hey, we used AI for this, but we're hiring human for the actual thing. And, those scratch jobs, okay, those were $50, $100, maybe even a $200 job sometimes, depending on where you found them. But that was the kind of stuff that I think it was inevitably made to replace. And unfortunately, what that means is that some of the very lower end of the ecosystem is falling off. But that's not necessarily such a bad thing either, because I think we're evolving more towards an industry where clients are going to have a very distinct choice between good qualified voice actors who have trained well and who can do the job well, because a lot of the ones who are nibbling around the edges are probably going to wind up going the way of the dodo eventually, or they get the robots and they have to choose, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think ultimately what that means is that those of us who, and I don't think it's going to kill off a large part of the industry, but I think the people who remain, we can charge the same or more, because, hey, if you want a real good human voiceover, this is where they are, and there are only so many of them. Yep. I always use that stat where I tell people there are 200,000 people in North America calling themselves professional voice actors. Okay. Out of those 2,000, it's 10,000 making any kind of money that your government's tax authorities are worried about, right? Yep. And out of those 10,000, it's 2,000 who are booking most of the work. Okay. So it's actually a very small number of people who are booking consistently and making a full-time good living doing voiceover. It's, and that group, if that, contracts down to 1,500 or 1,250 or whatever, and, and there's not that group out there that's still doing the really marginal stuff, well, the clients are going to have to make a choice. We go cheap or we go pro. Yep. So no, it's not a nothing burger, but it's not a Whopper either.
It definitely hasn't. I will say I was in the same place where you were, where I was trying to put forward a brave face and I was trying to be the optimistic, voice of reason. But, there was a part of me underneath that was butt puckered, wondering what was going to happen. But I just haven't seen it play out like we all thought. And, obviously I'm very grateful for that. But so let's come at AI from a slightly different angle then. One of the things that I'm reading a lot about is how it's impacting marketing. and how it's being used to make marketing ads even more targeted than what they've already been in the past, if that seems even possible, but even more personalized. So instead of a company creating one ad that ships to all networks and platforms, for example, there might be a dozen or even dozens of variations, and each one is individually targeted. This is targeted to women in this demographic. This is targeted to men in that demographic. This is targeted to this ethnic group. This is targeted to whatever. And so they're getting much more specific and targeted. So does that ultimately mean more VO?
Yes. And this has already started happening with VO outside of AI. Part of that maybe because they're getting more granular marketing data based on AI. I don't know whether, the marketing data is getting better and better and better year after year. But what we've seen is much more geo-targeting and geofencing of spots. It started out being primarily a web ads, internet ads, OTT thing, right? And now we're seeing it get into TV and get into radio as well. This was something that happened with politicals for it's been happening for many years, where you might have, particularly in a big state, say a Senate race, or a governor's race, might have the same spot with the same writing, but 10 voices, 20 voices, 30 voices in 30 different counties or regions that are micro-targeted based upon who it is that they're trying to talk to in those regions, right? So this has been a thing there for a while. It's starting to seep into retail advertising. I've seen spots now that have used the same visual and the same script, but they've used 6 different talent across the country in different regions, depending who they're targeting. I think we're going to see that in another 5 years. It might be 50 talent. So I think it's a double-edged sword kind of thing. It's a good news, bad news thing, in that you will see some erosion of true national campaigns. I think you may see 10-20% erosion in true national campaigns over the next 5 years. But the flip side is the ones that are no longer just a national spot that are using one voice, they're going to use 5 voices, 10 voices, 50 voices. They'll probably spend more money on the voiceover in general. There'll be more work. You're just going to have to make up for some of it in volume. And I think ultimately that will be a good thing for the industry, because there's just going to be more volume work out there. And we all know that, as much as we love those biggies that come in that are, wow jobs, that there are only so many of those in a year, right? And it's that volume work that keeps us going. So I'm actually kind of excited by it.
So do we need to change our expectations or tamper our expectations from a rates perspective then? Because let's just say that a company's going to do, 10 different versions of a spot or 50 different versions of a spot. They're not going to 50x their budget for voiceover. So I'm assuming...
but I don't think we have to temper rates too much, because what it's going to be is they're going to pay for 6x regionals versus 1x national, and the math is going to be pretty close. It may wind up, they may wind up spending a little bit more, but it's not going to be so much dramatically more that I think they're going to be hitting us up necessarily to go any lower than we already are. If it's something that's targeting, 50 counties in one state, all right, those are probably $100, $150 spots if they're running for a cycle. But I think it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. So no, I don't think so. I think you're going to see the same sort of usage-based fee system that we've had in place for many, many years. I just think you may see 2 years, 5 years down the road, we're hiring one person to be the voice of our brand for the entire country.
How does this play into demos then? Do we still create the broad demo that shows our full range, or is there a case to be made for if you're a voice that really fits a particular niche or really fits a particular demographic, do you just really lean into that specifically, because then you could potentially own that category as these things, as the advertising shifts that way?
I think it's a different answer for every talent. I think if there's some talent who are so this, and that's kind of all, they're a one-trick pony, but it's a really good trick, and maybe they've got a couple of different moves within that trick, but that's really what they do, then sure, that can be your primary demo. I think if you are versatile, that there still is, the classic demo is still the coin of the realm. Remember, the demo at the end of the day, depending on what genres we're talking about, but if we're talking about, what I call sexy demos, your broadcast genre demos, commercial, promo, in-show narration, imaging, affiliate, affiliate, trailer, animation, video game, the stuff that agents care about, right? The primary purpose of your demo is to get representation or to get on rosters. And at the end of the day, those people still want to see folks that can do as many things as possible really, 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 really well. There are plenty of them who won't consider you unless you can play really well in 3 different particular categories, right? So I think that will still hold up. But the idea of I'm doing a demo for somebody tomorrow, who I've done a few reels for, is a great talent. He's a heavy hitter, and he said, I want to do, because he's seeing this shift right now, and he is the ultimate alpha voice, okay? And he's like, I want to do a demo that's just alpha ownership based reads with a little bit of variety on it, but I want to be on the bleeding edge of this trend. So we're doing one based entirely on that. But here's the thing: this guy earns $350,000 a year. Okay, he can afford it. It's a luxury. Okay, so when you start getting into deeply niche based demos or very heavily targeted demos, those are luxury demos still. And I think that if that's where you're going, it should be something that serves as a complement, not necessarily as a primary, because at the end of the day, agents, managers, and production companies and ad agencies, they still want to hear people who can do multiple things.
Are demos going to shift in that we've always had this traditional 60 or 90 second kind of cohesive demo that we've got, but first and foremost, we have no attention spans anymore. Thank you, TikTok and Instagram. But then if you look at what online casting is doing, you're not posting demos, you're posting samples, and they don't want 3 or 4 demos. They want 50 samples. And I mean, VoiceZam started that years ago when it started breaking up the demo into individual clips. And you could see that people don't listen to demos, they listen to individual clips. Are we going to get to a point where the demo shifts to more of a clip based rather than a demo on the whole?
I think at the low end of the business, it already has. That's how Fiverr works. That's how the pay-to-play sites work. The full demos still have some value there, but they're searching for individual terms and listening to individual pieces within your demo. If you are only playing in that world, does having 100 clips make more sense than having 5 full targeted demos? Probably. Okay. But at the high end of the business, it shocks me sometimes how, when I get agents in the room for, conferences or webinars or in-person workshops or whatever it may be, how many of them say, yes, okay, you need to grab my attention in those first 8 or 10 seconds, okay, and make me interested. But if you grab me in, I'm going to listen to the whole thing, and that doesn't matter if it's a minute 30, okay? They're going to listen to the full reel if they like you. They're rooting for you. They want you to make them money, so they want to see what you have to offer, right? So I think it depends on where you play, and I think it depends on what your goals are and what your purpose is. I think having as many clips as you possibly can for online casting sites and whether they're pay to play or lower end ones, that is a very good thing. But I think in the classic brick and mortar world of voiceover, which, by the way, pay to play sites are fading. They're not what they were. They're, if you're platinum on Voice 123, you're still having kind of the same experience you've always had. If you're at the $2,200 level, and you stay in the top 10 or 20 or 30%, you're still probably doing all right. But everybody else on pay to play is not. It's not the same level of access that it used to be, and it's part of that is because their aggregate growth has not over the past few years kept up with the growth of membership. Interestingly, the sites are still mostly growing in terms of the number of jobs that are coming onto those sites, but it's also because people forget these sites are almost 20 years old, or they are 20 years old. Okay, this is the way the last generation disrupted casting. The current generation is much more likely to do their own search on Google or ChatGPT and find you directly and come to you directly, okay? And then the high-end buyers are still going through the agents and the casting directors and the managers and the old school players. So it's a very broad and dynamic game. And at the top end of the business, nothing, the agents want to hear a demo that showcases range. They want to hear that you can do multiple things well. They want to hear that you can do multiple genres well. So if you have multiple demos and multiple genres, that's the idea. At the low end of the business, I think it's a little less important than it used to be, but I think most people are trying to work their way higher and higher. So yeah, everything evolves, but I think the classic demo is still very much what it has been for a long time.
Based on what happened in November, speaking of demos and politics, the political cycle, I don't think actually ever ends anymore. I think
Not
it's
anymore,
just we're just in a perpetual state of political. So who is in most need of a refreshed or a new political demo, even if theirs isn't that old, just based on what happened in November?
I mean, sadly, the answer is everybody, and that includes me. I mean, my demos are, I'm the cobbler with no shoes. But it's really interesting, actually, because if the result had been the opposite, everybody's stuff would be good for another 12 to 18 months. And they'd be able to run it all the way up until about the start of the midterms. The entire issue spectrum has shifted. The language that both parties are using has shifted. The messaging has shifted completely, to the point that I have a Democratic talent right now who's got an LGBTQIA plus advocacy spot on her demo, and I advise that she redo it, not because we don't want to touch the issue, it's still a very important issue, but because the way it is written is not the way that the Democrats would write and run that ad today. They would be using the language differently. And so this is very much true for both sides, that the outcome of the election has completely, I mean, look, we're talking about tariffs on Canada and Mexico. I was reading a thing before we got online talking about, that the Trump wants a made for television moment, and that the Mexican government's starting to worry that that's going to be actual military incursions into northern Mexico. So we're in a whole different world, and the issue spectrum is completely different now. Even the issues that were the same before are being addressed differently by both sides. Doesn't mean every demo is dated. I had, there's a talent named Cody Rock, who's a great guy I've worked with quite a bit, did his political. He sent it to me recently. He's like, does this one need to be redone? I listened. I said, actually, you're pretty lucky. These are all fairly evergreen, and I think you're probably good through the midterms. Somebody else come to me and said, yeah, probably 3 out of the 5 need to be replaced. The good news is that, most demo producers have a refresh rate, right? So you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you've got 2 or 3 or 4 spots that are still good, you just fix the ones that you need to fix, and you're talking hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars. So that can be a little bit more refreshing. But if you get into the political voiceover game, you have to understand what you're getting into. It is people used to talk about promo demo being the demo that you needed to change the most often. That political is the demo that you're going to have to redo and then refresh more than any other. And whether that's every 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, it's not going to be more than 2 years before you have to refresh it in most cases.
Are you doing that now? Or are you waiting a little bit to see what actually happens and how things actually, because I feel like we're living minute to minute right now.
We are. And so it's a question of where you are in your career, how much you're booking in political, how aggressively you're targeting it right now. It is a slower period right now, but that is going to change March 4th. By this time in May, into late May, we're going to be rolling into all the midterm stuff, into primaries, into midterm preseason stuff, and it's going to start really kicking. So it's going to change relatively quickly. So yeah, I would be doing it now. I'm trying to be even more cautious about just writing things that are a little bit more evergreen on the demos as much as I possibly can, but you can't anticipate it. If you get into the political game, look, it's a high volume genre. It's a lower competition genre. It's a place where you can make some pretty decent money, and where breaking in is not always as hard as it is in certain other genres. But the downside to it is that you do have to stay on top of your marketing materials and what it is that you're putting out there, and your demo is going to have to change with some frequency as the world shifts.
So speaking of politics and hot topics, after their return appearance at VO Atlanta last year, I'm pleased to report that a certain Canadian online casting company obviously wholly embraced the error of their ways and spent all of 2024 riding the ship, right? In what could only be considered one of the greatest corporate corrections of all time. Oh, wait. Actually, absolutely nothing changed. So do they get a seat at the table at VO Atlanta this year?
No.
Were you surprised?
No.
Yeah, me neither.
They're run by Morgan Stanley.
Yeah, they don't care.
I mean, come on, it's a $1 billion company running a 9-figure company, and and they'd rather we were robots.
Yep. Although I don't see how that ultimately plays out for them, but
no,
I was just curious because I know that was part of the thing, right? Was you're going to come, you're going to speak your piece,
Yep,
Are we actually going to
we took
see
no
any
money from them,
change?
and
Yep.
to the extent that when I had lunch with or breakfast with a gentleman before his appearance on the panel, he tried to grab the check, and I grabbed it right back. I wanted to see that change before we took a dime from them, and sadly, it hasn't come. So no, they won't be there this year.
I don't think they'll be missed.
I don't think so.
Your keynote speaker this year, though, let's talk about credits. Holy mackerel. So talk about the decision to bring in Amari Williams, and is there any insights into what we might expect?
You guys are in for just he's inspiring. He is a great speaker. It's really funny because when I called him up, he had no idea he thought I was just asking him to present. And I said, "Tell me about yourself." And I just shut up and listened. And he practically gave me a keynote address, and it was wonderful. It was fantastic. I just kept, well, tell me a little more, right? I'm like, yeah, you're my. I had him on my. I mean, I knew he was who I wanted, but I wanted to hear him talk, right? And I'm like, oh man, you're perfect. He's, just a great story of a kid who was raised in LA and, came up from humble beginnings and grew into, he's gotta be one of the top 5 booking talents in our industry. One of the things that really motivated me to choose Amari was that, as much as he does have a very impressive character IMDb, I was looking very specifically for somebody who was dominant in promo, in-show, commercial, because I feel like when we do keynotes at a lot of these conferences, it's always a character. I mean, it's great. Don't get me wrong. We love Eric Bauza. We love Maurice LaMarche. We love Troy Baker and people like that, right? Bob Bergen, right? But at the end of the day, it's always a character, guys, right? Yeah. And it's always Deborah Wilson. It's always a character talent, right? And I'm like, I want somebody, even if they have that, right? But I want somebody who's crushing it in the other things, right? And so that was very important to me. And I had a few people in mind, but he was top of list. And I'll tell you what, I am so happy that he booked the Taco Bell Super Bowl commercial with a read that was on this current ownership-based trend, which just absolutely killed me because I actually auditioned for it. Kayla, who you guys all know is my assistant, also a fantastic star, she shortlisted for it. The spec on it was her. I'm like, we both got the audition at the same time while we were out in LA, and I'm like, you're going to book this. This is you, right? And I'm thinking, this is young, this is female, this is hip, this is playful, right? And she did pretty well with it, but he booked it. And I'm like, wow, they went with a 40s gravelly, still playful, great read, right? But textured male voice on it. Right. I'm like, I did not see that coming. That was really interesting. And and again, what a credit for him to have this huge campaign with LeBron James and Doja Cat and, and other celebs. It was perfect timing, but he's an inspiring guy. He's also one of these people who has not come out and been at a lot of stuff in the industry. And that was another point of focus for me for VO Atlanta this year is really, we have some of our favorites, including you. But I really wanted to make an emphasis, even if you look at the agents that we have this year from the big agencies, it's not the same ones. Right? It's Liz Klausner from DPN. It's Lisa Marber-Rich from Atlas. It's different agents from some of the bigger agencies that are coming in, some newer CDs, some different people on the management side. And the idea is to try to keep these things as fresh as possible so it's not just the same people and the same information year after year, which, by the way, to all of my voiceover friends out there who are presenters at these things on a regular basis, if you don't get an invite, it's not because I don't love you. It's because we are trying to keep them fresh. And we are going to rotate most people every couple of years, I think is going to be pretty common. And some years will be one voice, some year will be VOA, some years will be both. But we want to keep this stuff fresh. We want people not coming back and having a different but enriching experience every single time. And so I think Amari just fit that to a T.
You and Anna really are running. I mean, it's the premier conference in the industry, I think. And somehow you guys managed to top yourselves each year.
Don't set too high a bar.
I think you guys already did that. I think it's too late for that. So
Cheez-Its for lunch this year.
Is there any special insights or little nuggets that you can give us ahead of time of some things that we might expect this year, we might see this year?
I think we found a formula that's working pretty well, and I think it's going to be what people expect in terms of quality and attention to detail. And, that's Anna's signature, and her hallmark is making the whole thing come off as seamlessly as possible. I think, as always, it'll be, filled with educational and moving moments and fun moments and funny moments and community. But I think that, where we've landed in terms of the creature comforts and the amenity and kind of raising the quality of the food and that kind of stuff, and also motivating the hotel staff in new ways to sort of rise up. We were really impressed last year. It's the first time that hotel ever felt like they kind of kicked it up to like a 5-star level for our guests for the weekend.
Everything.
Yeah,
continuously.
And that was, and look, we take pretty good care of them. But I'll never forget checking in last year, and the lady behind the desk said, "Oh, I'm like, oh, this is who I am." She goes, "Oh, I know who you are." She goes, "You're our favorite event." And I'm like, that means, nice. And that's a reflection on Anna more than anything else, because she's the one, with Jessica as her assistant, who are, just in their ear all day, every day, and making sure that everything's right. And, if people saw the amount of communication and work that went into that back and forth, it's something else. I'm glad my role is filling the lineup and, coming in and shaking hands and kissing babies and being the mayor, because that's about all the energy I got. I couldn't do it, Anna does. She's amazing.
Give us one final thought for, if there's one thing as voice actors that we should be paying attention to, thinking about, focusing on, keeping our eyes on for 2025 to continue on a growth trajectory. What's one thing, one final thought that you think?
I'm going to cheat and give you two. One is
it's acceptable. I'll allow it.
America. One is what you talk about all the time, okay, which is marketing. I am seeing far more talent today, especially newer talent, achieve early success through their own marketing efforts than through pay-to-play or lower-end casting platforms. Then, look, 10 or 15 years ago, I would have said the opposite. I would have said there is a ton of money to be made on the main pay-to-play sites. Mm-hmm. There's, only so much competition. Get on there, be good, kick ass, and you're going to do great. The way that these sites have gone now, they're different. If you're not paying a ton, it's more difficult. Marketing is where it's at, especially for newer talent, but also for people who have been in the business for a long time as well. On the flip side, I think it's like, again, pendulum swings. We've talked about things evolving, things moving. I think we are in a moment of sort of evolving back into the agents and the higher end of the business becoming more important once you have built that foundation, if you want to take the leap, okay? Because I think that if you go back to 2012, 2013, 2014, okay, you could get to six figures on your own. And then if you were awesome, if you were top tier, you could get to 3, 4, 500,000 on your own without a whole lot of other help. Those days are not necessarily here anymore. I think that's harder than it used to be for a lot of different reasons. But I think that's a little more challenging than it used to be. And I think that now the agents have done such a good job. They don't get enough credit for having preserved the really high quality jobs and control over the really high quality jobs. That if you want to take it to 250, to $500,000, to a 7-figure career, which we all know. I just put out my little nuggets today, and one of them was, hey, chances are you're going to make $60,000 a year doing this. So if you're hoping to make those kind of numbers I just talked about, most people aren't going to do that. Okay, it's a lot has to go right for that to happen. But if you want that to happen, I do think you need the old world players in your life these days to make it happen. And I think it's just a pendulum swing back towards that part of the market really being focused on. You know what, the regional agencies have become more exacting in terms of who they're accepting in many cases, but also the ones who have survived over the past 5 or 10 years, and there are a few that have gone by the wayside, but the ones that have survived and that are doing well are doing a really good job of curating. Agencies like Wayman in Minneapolis, one of my favorites. I was just up there with Amy Oppegard recently, but this is a little agency that goes out and hustles up all of its own work, doesn't use the same breakdown services as everybody. I'm not getting crossover from them, with 18 other agents. I only book a few times a year through them. Okay. But it's always something really good. The big Purdue thing that I booked with them a while back was through Wayman. I love agencies like that are out there hustling. It may not be, as stars and bright lights as some of the ones on the coast, but they become more exacting and they're doing a good job too. So the agency game's still important. And I think you have to have a mix if you really want to sail to the top of the industry these days.
Right on. If somebody wants to reach out, maybe they just realized that they need to refresh their political demo, or maybe they want to put a more assertive, deep, or gravitas read on their commercial spot or something like that. Where do we go to find you? And you mentioned it. We'll put it all in the show notes too.
Sure. Well, email is always the best way to get a hold of me. jmichael@jmcvoiceover.com. And if you want to hear demo samples, jmcdemos.com. Go on there and you can have a listen to hundreds of the talent that we've worked with, and we don't hide their names either. It's not like Bob S. You can actually look them up and they're real. And hey, if they hated us, they'll tell you. So
don't think that's a problem. Well, Jim Michael, this has been great. Good conversation. Next time we talk, hopefully there won't be anything catastrophic going on in the world, and we can just have
I hope not.
Normal conversation about normal voiceover things.
I look forward to treating you as a good and loyal subject. I mean, a great friend for many, many years.
Are they going to let me across the border at this point? I'm like, I don't even know.
We will see you in Atlanta, and if they don't let you across the border, we'll come and we'll launch like an A-team mission. Me and Brad and Pat will come up there and get you out.
It would almost be worth it. All right, man. Thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom, for everything that you do for the industry, and absolutely looking forward to seeing you in VO Atlanta as well.
Thanks, brother. See you soon.